Hey, welcome to the first chapter of your state required class. I'm proud to see that you've made it this far. Uh, this class is a accredited class that will give you credit towards the 75-hour requirement you need to take the state exam. So your time and your credits all start right here, right now. You're about to learn what you can and cannot do in real estate in the state of Pennsylvania. So I want to welcome you to chapter one. Uh, you have an ebook that I've designed for you for easy reading. The ebook has highlighting ability, which you will need to highlight certain things. When I stop, I say, please highlight the following. You should highlight them in yellow. You have many different color highlights that you can use, but yellow is going to be the class color. Anything I tell you to highlight, highlight in yellow. This way here, you know those things are going to be on your state exam. And so you'll have easy reference. I also created this ebook, so after you highlight something on the side, you should have an opening to take notes. And I will say, highlight easement and take a note. An easement is the right to use someone else's property legally. So now you will be highlighting and taking a note. There's one other feature that I like about the ebook is the read out loud function where you can listen to the book read to you in many different languages. So if you're driving and you want to go over your chapters and you can listen to it on your stereo system, your speaker system, your Bluetooth system in your car. So the chapters can read to you in different voices, male, female, and different languages. Also, it has the ability to widen the chapters, stretch the words, make them larger font for easier reading as well. So I designed this ebook to make it easy to see and read and have many functions like highlighting and note taking and the ability to read out loud to you in different languages as well. So I hope you enjoy the ebook that I am going to provide you free of charge with this class. And we're going to get ready to start our 75-hour course chapter by chapter, taking it one chapter at a time. And this is going to be chapter one, real property and the law, the rights, the rules, the responsibility. You're going to start learning what you can and cannot do with real estate in the state of Pennsylvania. So in your ebook, let's begin. By the time that this unit is completed, this chapter is completed, you will have the ability to explain the rights associated with the ownership of real property and understand the distinct characteristics that define real estate. You will be able to differentiate between real property and personal property, recognizing how each is classified and treated within the industry. Additionally, you will gain insight into the physical, economic, and social attributes that influence land and its use. Finally, you will develop a working knowledge of the various branches of law that impact real estate, helping you navigate the legal landscape with greater confidence and clarity. At the beginning of every chapter, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see these key terms. You'll be getting a homework assignment, and your homework assignment will be to make sure that you're understanding these key terms. So, no other school will waste their time with the student in the vocabulary of the key terms. I will. I will make sure that you understand the vocabulary, the key terms, because this is a language that we speak. Doctors have their language, lawyers have their language, and we in the real estate industry have our language. So you're about to learn a new language, the language of real estate, which includes legal words and real estate words. So it's going to be very important that you understand these key terms in each chapter to be the best that you can be and understand as much as you can possibly understand in real estate. So we'll come back to these key terms later as part of your homework assignment. All right, let's continue with the overview. And the overview is going to give us a quick synopsis of what we're about to learn. So let's talk about it. Real estate operates like any other marketplace. Property serves as the product, and the real estate professionals act as the representatives responsible for presentation and sale. As with any field in sales, a deep understanding of the product is essential. Whether working with buyers, sellers, renters, or investors, your ability to guide others depends on how well you grasp the details of what you're offering. Moreover, real estate transactions often involve complex legal consideration. This chapter is designed to give you a strong foundation in the core concept of real property knowledge that will support your success throughout your professional journey. So, the learning objectives, understanding the legal rights that accompany ownership of real property and recognize the defining features and characteristic that distinguish real estate within the legal framework. Land, real estate, and real property. While commonly used as if they mean the same thing, the terms land, real estate, and real property each carry distinct meanings within the field of real estate. So, to the general public, these words may appear interchangeable. However, for those entering the profession, it is essential to recognize the subtle differences between them. A clear understanding of these terms and the legal implication tied to each is fundamental to grasping how property ownership is defined and governed. Let's start with land. Land is the natural surface of the earth. It includes everything from the ground beneath us, extending all the way down to the center of the earth, and to the air and the space above the ground, stretching upwards without any fixed limits into the deepest of the sky. Land also includes things that occur naturally and are permanently attached, like trees, rocks, rivers, and lakes. These natural features are not created by people, yet they are part of what makes each piece of land unique. Understanding land in its pure natural state is the first step in learning how ownership and property rights are defined in real estate. Land is more than just the ground that we walk on. It also includes the soil beneath the surface and the minerals hidden deep underground. Let me stop here for a moment. Pennsylvania is very rich in mineral rights. We have coal, oil, gas, shale, just to name a few. Copper. We have many minerals underneath the ground. And if your property sits above these mineral deposits, oil, coal, gas, you not only own your property to land, but you also own the subsurface rights, the mineral rights below the ground, which is important for you as a real estate agent to understand these things. So we're going to have to understand that we don't only just own the property, we own underneath the property and above the property in the air as well. So we're going to talk about the minerals hidden underneath the ground. And we're going to talk about the air above it extending into the furthest reaches of the sky. Okay? Natural features that are permanently part of the land, such as rocks, vegetation, and bodies of water, they're included as well. The space below the surface of the earth, the ground, is called subsurface. Highlight subsurface. And subsurface means below the ground. Subsurface mineral rights. Subsurface. Highlight subsurface, it means below the ground. While the space above is known as airspace. Highlight that. Now, you might not understand airspace, but if you want to build a high rise building, let's take the Comcast building, 57 stories high. Each floor of that building, the air above the lot had to be purchased to build each floor of that building. These are called air lots. Just like the ground's a lot, the air above it can be divided and sold. So it's real estate. This is why it's very important to understand that real estate's not just the ground and the property, It's what's been up below the ground and above the ground. So we're going to talk about air rights, especially when we're building high-rise buildings, right? Because much of the Earth's surface is covered by water, there are specific state and local laws that regulate ownership and the use of waterways, including rivers, lakes, and other bodies of water that touch or cross property lines. And we'll talk more about it later. We're just highlighting the portions of land. Now, before I go any further, let me say something, ladies and gentlemen. Your first three chapters might seem a little overwhelming to you because it's new. You're learning a new language. Here's what I want you to understand. Don't quit. Take all your notes and go over these videos a couple times and take your time. But by the time we get to the second week and the third week, so we get into chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, we're going to be redundant. I'm going to be saying these things again and again and again till it becomes solidified in your brain. So your first three chapters might seem a little overwhelming, but trust me, don't quit. Stick it out, stick with me, and you will see by the time we get to chapters 5, 6, 7, we're already going to be repeating things. And then we're going to be doing it again and again and again throughout the chapters, throughout your 75 hours. This is a memory course technique that I use in the class. Reading out loud is another memory class technique that we will use as well. And we'll talk more about it as we're going along. But I do want to share one thing with you before we go any further. One of my best real estate agents, ladies and gentlemen, he failed the exam many times, and he failed it enough times that most people would have quit, but he did not quit. And he finally passed the exam, and his first commission check was $12,000. I don't want you to get to the finish line and quit. Nothing can be accomplished by quitting or coming up with excuses. So you are now on your journey. It costs you $28 to get started. This is a licensed class, and you are now going to learn more about real estate than you ever imagined. And I just want you to know that it will be a little complicated, your first three chapters, but it's going to get much easier. It's like a puzzle. We throw out all these puzzle pieces. We try to start putting it together, and we don't know where to begin or end. And then finally, we start putting some corners together. Then maybe some other pieces fit together. And before you know it, you're starting to put this puzzle together. And before you know it, it's completed. So everything starts as 1,000 pieces of a puzzle, just like right now. Stick it out. I understand that it might be a little bit hard to absorb the first couple chapters, but trust me, it's going to get so much easier, and you'll be so glad that you didn't quit. Okay? So let's continue. Real estate. Real estate includes much more than just the land itself. It covers everything from soil beneath your feet to the airspace above and the subsurface layers below. But what truly defines real estate is not just the land, it's also what's built on that land. Anything permanently attached to the land becomes part of the real estate. These attachments can be natural, like rocks, trees, flowing streams, but often they are man made. In real estate, refer to these human man made additions as improvements. Highlight improvements. Anything that we build on a property, a house is an improvement, a garage is an improvement, the fence is an improvement. Anything that we add to the land is known as improvements. And this is going to be a big word for you in the real estate, improvements. And from this point forward, the house is an improvement to the land. The garage is an improvement to the land. Your fence is an improvement to the land. Anything man made and built on that land is known as improvements. Highlight improvements. Take your notes and make sure that you understand that we're going to relate to houses as the improvement, the garage as the improvement, the fence as the improvement, plus the natural things like trees and rocks and streams are improvements to the land. A house built on a lot is an improvement. So is the garage, a shed, even a driveway. Roads, sidewalks, fences, sewer system, utility lines are all examples of improvements, each adding function and value to the land. In short, real estate is made up of the land and everything permanently attached to it, whether shaped by nature or built by human hands, improvements to the land. Real property, and it's going to be important to understand the difference between real and personal property. Your real estate license is going to allow you to do residential and commercial. You will not need a separate license to do residential and commercial. One license does it all, but you will need a separate understanding. And this is where personal property and real property intertwine when we're dealing with commercial real estate. Okay? So let's start with real property. When we talk about real property, we're referring to more than just land. Real property includes three key parts: the land itself, anything permanently built on or attached to it, as we now know, called improvements, and highlight bundle of legal rights that comes with owning it. The deed, ladies and gentlemen, this is your bundle of legal rights. It always starts with the deed and what type of ownership and any other encumbrances or liens or judgments that could be against that property. Well, we'll find all these things in the deed. So, the deed is where we come to the bundle of legal rights. So every time I talk about the bundle of legal rights, the first thing that should come to your mind is the deed. All right. These ownership rights are powerful. They give the owner the legal ability to possess the property, to control how it's used within the framework of the law. Ladies and gentlemen, everything has to be done legally. You can't use the property illegally. The enjoyment of the property in any legal way, highlight within the law and highlight in any legal way. These are little clues that you need to understand. I told you you're about to learn what you can and cannot do legally with real estate. So these are the beginning segues of trying to tell you what we can do legally. All right. So you can possess the property, you can own it, live in it. You can control how you use that property. Is it going to be a duplex? Better be legal. Multifamily? Is it a single family home? Um, what about a Airbnb? Could you do that? And you'll find out you can't unless the property is zoned hotel. So we're going to find out what we can and cannot do and control the property with. We get to enjoy it legally. We get to exclude others from the property to prevent trespassers from coming onto the property. And we get to sell it, transfer it, will it, give it away. These are all examples of the bundle of legal rights. This collection of rights is often called, again, highlight bundle of rights, the deed. And now you can see these bullet points are some of these legal rights. And it stays with the property unless it's clearly separated. Ownership also includes control of more than just the surface of the land. You also gain surface rights, the right to use the land surface, subsurface rights, the right to use and sell what's beneath, like mineral, oil, gas, shale. We talked about these things. Air rights, the right to use and sell the space above the property. Very important. All these rights are considered appurtenance. Now, you can highlight appurtenance, but we're going to come back to that in another chapter, okay? But which means they automatically come with the property unless stated otherwise. It's too soon to get to appurtenance. So we'll talk about appurtenance later. You'll hear appurtenance used in many different ways. Appurtenance, appurtenances. It's pronounced, tomato, tomato. All right. Appurtenance is the way that I believe it should be pronounced, and that's why you'll hear me say appurtenance. All right, but we will come back to that in another chapter. Real property versus personal property. If you're going to be doing commercial real estate, it's important to understand this. Understanding the difference between real property and personal property is essential for both your national and your state exam. Real property is fixed in place, land and everything permanently attached to it. Personal property is also called chattels. Highlight chattels. Chattels and trade fixtures. These will be personal. And in your national portion of your exam, you're going to see the term chattel. But on the state portion of your exam, you might see trade fixture. So take a note. Chattel hyphen trade fixtures. And we're going to talk about it, but these will be now personal properties. All right. And we'll get to them in a second. So think of furniture, clothing, lawn equipment. These items are not part of the real estate. They're not permanently attached. Okay. However, sometimes personal property becomes real property. For example, if a homeowner installs a built-in bookcase or bolts down a custom cabinet, that item may now be considered a fixture. Highlight fixture because what we're going to learn is the difference between a fixture and a trade fixture. Here's what I want you to write down. Take a note. Fixture is residential. Trade fixture is commercial. Again, fixture is residential. Trade fixture is commercial. Now, I am giving you cliff notes. I'm giving you short versions. I don't want to complicate it, not at this stage. So I'm keeping everything as simple as I possibly can. These have more defined, deeper meanings, but for right now, keeping it short and simple. Okay. So fixture personal is residential, and trade fixture commercial. Okay. Some things that was once personal property but could now be considered part of the real estate, real property. In residential transactions, fixtures generally stay with the house unless written otherwise in the agreement, and we'll talk about that. But in commercial leasing, there are special types of fixtures, and these are known as trade fixtures. So highlight trade fixture. And again, fixture would be residential. Trade fixture will be in our commercial arena. This is personal property installed by a business tenant for the use in that trade, like display racks, pizza ovens. Under most state laws, trade fixtures remain the tenant's personal property and can be removed at the end of the lease as long as any damage is repaired. Here's what you need to know, ladies and gentlemen. Let's say that you're now a real estate agent and you're representing a client who is doing a 3-year lease at a shopping mall for a pizza parlor. Well, they may install their oven, providing they can remove the oven at the end of their lease and put the property back to the way it was. But just because they installed the oven to the floor, they bolted, let's say it's a barbershop, and they bolted the chair to the floor. Just because they affixed it or attached it in a way that may seem permanent, in the commercial arena, they can attach it and also remove it on or before the last day of their lease. Because in the commercial arena, these things are personal property that the tenant needed for their business. They needed the barber chair. They can't have it all wibbly wobbly. They needed the pizza oven. They can't have it falling over. So they needed to bolt these things down in such a way that in residential, it would become a permanent fixture because of its attachment, but not in commercial. All right, so it's a trade fixture. And once the lease is over, ladies and gentlemen, your client doesn't have the right to go back into that property after the lease is over. So you would have to make sure that your client understands that they would have to remove their trade fixtures or their chattels on or before the last day of the lease. And the property should be put back in the same condition it was when they rented it 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever the situation may be. Okay? So trade fixtures belong to the tenant, fixtures belong to the property. In summary, real property is the land, the things permanently attached to it called improvements, and the legal rights that come with the ownership, the deed, the bundle of legal rights. Understanding what stays, what goes, who owns what is a big part of real estate. And it will show up on both your national and your state portion of your licensing exam. So let's get into more details of the deed and the title. If you took my free class, you would understand the difference between a deed and a title. And it's important you understand the difference. We sell property by deed. We sell vehicles by title. So what's the difference? Because you hear the word title. I have title to the property. I got the title to the land. We use these terms, but we probably don't understand what we're saying or meaning. This is why you're taking this class, to get a better understanding, and you're not going to be using terms inappropriately. So what's the difference between a deed and a title? You ready to write this down? The deed, D-E-E-D, unless you spell it backwards, then it would be D-E-E-D, same way. Okay, it doesn't matter. So the deed, ladies and gentlemen, is the written instrument, the one that has your name on it, that says you are the legal owner of this property. We sell property by deed. Title is the process of making sure the deed is good. So, write this down. The deed is the written instrument. The deed is the written instrument. Title is the process of making sure the deed is good. Title is the process of making sure the deed is good. Title search, abstract the title, title certificate, title insurance, transfer. So, title is a process to make sure there's no liens, no judgments, that the title is good and marketable. But we sell property and own property by deed. Title's the process of making sure the deed is good. All right. So let's get into this bundle of legal rights. When someone receives ownership of real property, they aren't just getting land or a building, they're receiving a set of legal powers that define what they can and cannot do with that property. These rights are known in real estate as bundle of legal rights. This bundle begins the moment ownership is transferred, usually through a deed. The deed is the legal document that passes these rights from one owner to another. While we'll talk more about deeds and title later, it's important to understand that the rights attached to the property are granted by this document called the deed. The idea of bundle of rights comes from Old English law. Back then, a seller might have given a buyer a handful of dirt or a bundle of sticks to symbolize the different powers tied to ownership. So by accepting the dirt or by accepting the sticks from the tree on the land, you became the owner of the land. Because back in biblical times and ancient Egyptian times in English law, we didn't actually have parchment paper and so forth. So we had to do things a little bit differently. But we still go back to that time. Just like the sticks, each right in the bundle can be separated, held, or transferred on its own. But together they make up the full ownership. So you're about to see how we can sell one property to probably 5 different owners in a second. This is how we make money in real estate. The standard bundle of legal rights includes the right of possession, the right to occupy the property legally, all right, to live in that property legally, the right to control the property within the framework of the law. So you can't turn a property into a rooming house unless you had it legally zoned for such. So you can only operate the property in its legal zoning capacity. The right of enjoyment. You get the right to live in the property, enjoy the property, as long as you're doing it lawfully. You're not disturbing the peace or no illegal activities being taken place out of the property. So you get to enjoy that property within its legal rights. The right of exclusion. This means you have the right to keep trespassers off your property that don't belong on your property. And the right of disposition. This means you have the right to sell it, to will it, to give it away. You have all these legal bundle of legal rights. These rights are part of what makes real property valuable. While the The property itself may stay in one place. These legal rights can be granted, leased, or limited depending on the agreement of sale. And we'll talk about these words granted, leased, and so forth later. In short, the bundle of legal rights explains what you are allowed to do once the deed is in your name. And mastering this concept is essential to passing the national portion of that licensing exam. Now, for tenants, we talked a little bit about it, and we're only going to hit it quickly because we'll go into this in other chapters. But in real estate, you'll often hear the word appurtenance, and you hear it butchered up and said in so many different ways. Uh, Along with real property. While we'll go deeper into this concept later, like I said, here's the basic idea of how to hold on to for now. An appurtenance is something that is connected to the property and adds value or benefit, even if it's not a physical part of the land itself. So take this little note. Appurtenance equals a benefit that stays with the property when it's sold. And we'll talk more about that later. So a parking space is an appurtenance to the property, the right to use the shared driveway, water rights improvements like septic systems, utility lines. These would all be examples of appurtenance. These things are considered part of the overall value of the real property because they are attached in legal terms, even if they're not physically built into the house or the land. The key idea, when the property is sold, the appurtenance usually transfers to the new owners unless the sales contract says otherwise. We'll revisit this term in other chapters, as I said. Now, subsurface rights. Subsurface means below the ground. Surface is the ground, subsurface below the ground. In real estate, ownership doesn't just mean the land that you walk on. Property can be divided into layers above, on, and below. This is how we get rich in real estate, ladies and gentlemen. So let's start with two basic terms. Surface rights, the right to use the land that you can see and stand on, surface rights. Subsurface, the right to use what's beneath the land. And Pennsylvania is very rich in these mineral rights. These rights can be owned together or separated and sold individually. It's possible for someone to own the ground, but not what's below it. Let's give you an example. You're going to see how several owners can own a property here. Let's say a landowner in Pennsylvania sells their oil and gas rights to a company. Later, they sell the rest of the land to another buyer, but they decide to keep the coal rights for themselves. And that buyer eventually sells the land again, but will keep, let's say we have a farmhouse and a stable on this property. So let's say we're selling this land that has a farmhouse and a stable, and we're now selling it to several different buyers. We're selling it to the gas and the oil company so that they can siphon and extract oil and gas from the ground. We're selling it to a buyer who's buying the farmhouse and the stable. We're selling an interest to another future potential buyer of this property. And we are also keeping the rights to the coal for ourselves. See how we have multiple owners of this property right now? So, as you can see in this example, we now have four different people who have legal ownership over a piece of property, uh, the same property. One owns the coal, the previous owner. One owns the oil and the gas. One owns the house, the stable, and the pasture. And one owns whatever's left of the land. In this situation, since it's a farm, maybe we have the rights to the future harvest, or maybe we have a future interest to buy something else in that property, which we'll talk more about that, especially if you want to be an investor. But now you got an understanding that property's not just the house, it's not just the land, but in many parts of Pennsylvania, central, the Poconos, and so forth, we're very rich in mineral rights. But in all parts of Pennsylvania, the air above that property is real estate as well. And we're going to talk about it. So remember, real estate ownership can be divided like a pie. It doesn't always go to just one person. In Pennsylvania and many other states rich in natural resources, it's common for subsurface rights to be bought, sold, and leased separately from the rest of the land. This is why it's important to read the deed carefully. It will show which rights are included and which ones are already spoken for. Water rights, we'll talk much more about this later. Remember, your first 3 chapters, your first 3 days, ladies and gentlemen, in this class is going to be a little overwhelming. Just take all your notes. We're just cliff noting everything for these first 3 chapters. We'll go into details again and again and again later. So, water rights. In real estate, owning land near rivers, lakes, ocean doesn't automatically mean that you own the water or access to that water. The legal ability to access or use the water is called water rights. We got air rights, property rights, water rights, and these rights can be limited, regulated, or even denied depending on law and location. So, water rights, special legal rights to use water next to your property, but not ownership of the water itself. Take the Delaware River, take the Allegheny River, take the Susquehanna River, ladies and gentlemen, and we have property along these rivers. Do we have access to the river? Can we build a boat dock on it if our property's right on the Delaware River? If it's right on the Allegheny River, right along the Susquehanna River. So we're talking about Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh. Uh, and water and property along water is much higher in value. But the question is, what rights to the river do we have? That we talk about later in our water rights. What to know for the exam. Water rights come from common law, old court decisions, and they can vary by region. They're especially important in drier western states where water is scarce and considered a shared public resource. If land borders a water source, the owner may have the right to access and use the water for drinking, irrigation, beneficial use, stop others from using it improperly, like contaminating it or altering the flow of it, or in some cases, no rights at all, depending on government regulation. Water rights are often treated as restrictions on land ownership, meaning even if you own the land, your access to the water can still be limited by law, especially if we have commercial vessels in that body of water, which we'll talk about later. So now your new learning objective is to understand the difference between real property, which is permanently attached to the land, and personal property, which is movable, not fixed. Because it's very important that you understand in chapter 1 that you're going to be doing residential and commercial, and you're going to need to know the difference between real and personal. All right. So in real estate, it's important to know the difference between what stays and what goes when the property is sold. This comes down to 2 categories: real property and personal property. Real property is land and anything impermanently attached to it, which are improvements. And personal property is anything that can be removed without causing any structural damage to the property. So, what is personal property? Remember, personal property is called 2 things. It's called chattels. On the national portion of the exam, you'll see the word chattel. And on the state portion of the exam, you'll see trade fixtures. Okay? It includes anything you can move: furniture, clothing, money, stocks, bonds, bank accounts. If you can pick it up and take it with you, it is personal property. But what about trade fixtures? Fixtures are residential, fixtures stay with the property. Trade fixtures are commercial, trade fixtures are personal, and they don't stay with the property. In residential real estate, personal property usually goes with the seller unless it's written into the deal. But in commercial real estate, there's something called trade fixtures. That's equipment or items a business installs, like shelving and signs and ovens and chairs, a dental chair, a barber chair, and so forth. Even though they might be attached, they're still considered personal property. And the business can usually take them when they leave. So at the end or before the lease expires, the tenant has the right to remove these properties. Let me give you an example. Your tenant in your apartment, you're renting out an apartment building and your tenant lives in there and they put in a brand new kitchen in that apartment. Is that the tenant's brand new kitchen or is it the landlord's brand new kitchen? In residential, that would be the landlord's brand new kitchen that the tenant just put into the landlord's property. That becomes a fixture and it's the landlord's property. But let's say that that same tenant is renting another property for their pizza parlor and they have a lease for their pizza parlor and they put in a brand new kitchen into the leased property for their pizza parlor and they put a brand new kitchen in that. Is that the landlord's kitchen or is that the tenant's kitchen? In this situation, it's the tenant's kitchen. And the tenant has the right to remove that kitchen and take that with them on or before the last day of the lease. The tenant who's living in the property should have never put a new kitchen into a property they don't own, but they did in this example. And that becomes the landlord's property because that's residential, they're living in it. But in the commercial arena, they're leasing this property for a pizza parlor. They can put this brand new kitchen into the pizza parlor called a trade fixture, and that is personal property. They get to take that brand new kitchen with them on or before the last day of the lease. See how we have to understand the difference between a fixture, which is real property, and trade fixture, which is personal property. Okay? So, later we'll go deeper into it, but we're just taking some cliff notes right now. Let's get into factory built versus manufactured housing. Remember, I told you the deed is the instrument, the written instrument, and title's the process? Well, guess what? We're here again. When we use the term factory built, we use the term for mobile homes. In Pennsylvania, we're not allowed to say mobile homes. We got a very sensitive society today, and people are easily offended on many things. So, mobile home or trailer park, we got to be careful. So, but it's not just today, ladies and gentlemen. We have not been allowed to say mobile homes in Pennsylvania since 1976, ladies and gentlemen. So we use a term for mobile homes called factory built. Factory built's just the term. Instead of saying mobile home, we say factory built. But the process of making a mobile home or prefabricated home is it's manufactured in a factory. It's not built on a lot. It's built in a factory and then it's moved to the lot. So, manufacturing is the process of building the mobile home or the prefabricated home, but factory built is the term, a term that we use instead of saying mobile home, we use the term factory built because we have not been allowed to say mobile home since 1976. It's very important that you understand this. So, factory built is the term, manufacturing is the process. So in real estate, we use precise words because the wrong term can confuse the client, violate the law, or even offend someone without meaning to. So, one of the first terms that new agents must understand is the term factory built housing. So, instead of saying mobile home, especially with the 55 and over community, we don't like to say mobile homes, or we should not be saying mobile homes under our law. We're supposed to be saying factory built homes. It's just a term instead of saying mobile homes. Okay. Um, so as you can see, take a note. We use the term factory built housing in place of the old term mobile homes. And we have not been allowed to use the term mobile homes for homes built after June 15th, 1976. So it's an old law, it's a federal law that you as a real estate agent need to know. You can't get on. Jersey's different, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pennsylvania. You're taking a Pennsylvania state exam. So what they do on the other side of the bridge at Intercommerce is a different story. And this is why you have to understand why you're taking a national and a state portion of your exam because of state law. And Pennsylvania has its own state laws compared to Jersey, compared to Delaware, compared to Florida, okay, and so forth. So in Pennsylvania, You're not allowed to say mobile homes. You're certainly not allowed to say trailer park. It could be offensive, right? We have to be careful with that. So you're going to have to get used to a new terminology, factory built. Factory built. Instead of saying mobile home, factory built housing. Got to get used to it, ladies and gentlemen. It's the law. If you're going to be licensed anyway. All right. So, factory built homes is any home built in a factory and then moved to the land where it was placed and installed. If that home is built under federal rules, it's called a manufactured home. Manufactured is not the home, but it's the process of how that property was made. A mobile home, a prefab home, and we'll talk about that. But now, ladies and gentlemen, here's what you're going to need to understand. We're going to have lots of acronyms and initials on your state exam, like HUD. HUD's an acronym. We're going to have lots of initials, like maybe ABA. What's the difference between an acronym and initials? An acronym is when the initials give us a word, like HUD. The initials HUD. HUD stands for Housing and Urban Development, but the initials HUD give us a word, HUD. So when the initials actually give us a word, it becomes an acronym. But when the initials like ABA, Accredited Buyer Association, it does not give us a word, then they're initials. So ABA would be initials, but HUD, because it gives us a word, is an acronym. All right, so a quick goes deeper into that. Everything's just real basic. Okay, so acronyms and initials. We're going to have lots of them. I would recommend starting now that you have a separate page for all your initials and acronyms. This way, here you'll have quick reference to go back to those so you're not looking through chapter after chapter for these initials. So the very first one that we're going to be coming across is HUD, an acronym. These federal building rules are created and enforced by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, highlighted. HUD stands for Housing and Urban Development. And here's going to be part of your homework assignment, ladies and gentlemen. Who's the current secretary of HUD? Who was the secretary of HUD under the Biden administration? Who was Secretary of HUD under the Obama administration? Who was Secretary of HUD under Trump administration when he was the president the first time? And who's currently the Secretary of HUD under this administration? Now, before we go any further, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be mentioning presidents. Obama, Trump, Bush, Biden, Reagan, Carter, so forth. We all have our personal opinions and feelings on presidents. There's nothing I could do about that, ladies and gentlemen. We love them, we hate them, fine. What you need to understand is I have to explain to you what happened during those administrations. What happened in the real estate arena under the Obama administration? What happened under the Trump administration? What happened under the Reagan administration, the Carter, the Bush administration, and so forth? So, rather you like these presidents or don't like them, when I bring up their name, please understand that I can't help you with the love and the hate part. That's you. I have to make sure that you understood how those administrations affected our real estate arena, how they still affect us or don't affect us. So when I mention these presidents, I'm really talking about their administration and what they did and what effect it had on the real estate arena. So you'll need to understand from this point forward, every time we get a president, you're going to want to know who the Secretary of HUD is that that president appoints. Who's the current Secretary of HUD? And this is our federal overseer, our federal watcher in the real estate arena. So, who's the current Secretary of HUD? That'll be part of your homework assignment. You're probably Googling it right now, which is fine. But you need to remember these things. And each time we have a new president, you're going to need to know who the Secretary of HUD is. So, HUD has changed the regulation of mobile home to factory built homes. And these factory built homes, these manufactured homes have to meet certain standards to be habitable. So let's talk about it. These federal building rules are created and enforced by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Since 1976, HUD has required all manufactured homes to meet specific safety and construction standards. If the home meets these standards, it gets that red label, that HUD label, confirming that it is a certified manufactured home. Before it's placed on the land, the manufactured home is treated as personal property, like a vehicle. It's bought with a title. So you can buy a mobile home at a auto dealership and you buy it with a title. But once you place that factory built house, that manufactured house, rather it be in your yard, a campground, on a piece of land that you own, once you place it, we cancel out the title, the personal product, and we create a deed. So it went from personal to real. Okay? So before it's placed on land, manufactured home is treated as personal property, like a vehicle. It's bought and sold with a title and often purchased through a licensed motor vehicle dealer. But once the home is permanently attached to the land, the vehicle title, we're going to cancel it out, and then we're going to get a deed to the property. So at this point, it is no longer sold by like a vehicle. It must be transferred by deed. So now the only one that can sell this property is a licensed real estate professional because it went from personal to real. All right. And so only a licensed real estate professional can handle the sale now that a deed has been created. So take a note. Manufactured home becomes real property when it's attached to land and entitled by deed, not by a vehicle title. We'll go deeper into the modular homes, those prefabricated homes, and factory built homes later. Right now, we're just getting to know the difference between real and personal. Okay. So, what stays, what goes? One of the most important lessons in real estate, especially when it comes to writing or reviewing contracts, is knowing the difference between real property and personal property. Real property is attached to the land and goes with the sale. Personal property is movable. So let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. What's real and what's personal? Washer and dryer. Is that real property or is that personal property? How about kitchen cabinets and ceiling fans? Is that real property or personal property? How about the shrubbery and the lawn outside? Is the lawn and the tree real property or personal property? But what about the shrubs, the bushes? Are they real or are they personal? What stays? How about the refrigerator? Is the refrigerator real or is it personal? These are the things that's going to get you in the courtroom if you don't understand what's real and what's personal, ladies and gentlemen. What the seller can take, what the seller cannot take, what the buyer believes is coming with the property, not coming to property. So washer and dryer, real or personal. Refrigerator, real or personal. Kitchen cabinets, ceiling fan, real or personal. Shrubs, real or personal. Let's begin to see if we can understand and if we were right on what's real and what's personal. So let's start with those bushes outside. I once did a settlement, ladies and gentlemen, and it was a corner property. And when me and the buyer were doing our final walkthrough, all the shrubs from around the corner of the property were gone. My buyer says to me, "What happened to all the shrubs?" I didn't know. I thought maybe there was a plumbing problem. So I called the agent who was representing the seller. I said, "What happened to all the shrubs?" Now it's a corner property. You didn't really hear the traffic, but now that the shrubs are not there, you can hear the traffic. My buyer's not happy about this. Where did all the shrubs go? Well, the agent said the seller took them with them. They cultivated them since they were young, and now they took them with them. I didn't know back in the day. I'm like, really? Could they do that? See, we have to understand these things, don't we? So, trees, bushes, permanent landscaping, or rural property, they stay. But annual crops like vegetables, grains, or personal property, they're called emblements and they belong to the person who planted them, even if they no longer own the land. These are known as emblements. You don't have to worry about the word emblements. We'll get to that later. It's not going to be on your state exam that you have to worry about. But here's what you're going to need to know, ladies and gentlemen. The lawn, the tree, grapevines, these things will stay. You're not going to dig up the lawn and cut down a tree and take it with you. But the shrubbery, whether they're potted or not, well, these things legally could be personal property. And I'll share lots of court cases with you, ladies and gentlemen, over my 30 years of experience to help you get a better understanding. So we need to understand it, and we'll get into it because we still got to deal with the washer, dryer, refrigerator, and everything yet still. So let's talk about the two key terms. These two words are going to be on your state exam: annexation and severance. And here's what you need to know. Take a note. Annexation means attach, attach. Severance means to separate. Annexation takes personal property and makes it real. Annexation means attach. It takes personal property and makes it real. Severance takes real property and makes it personal. All right? Severance, to separate, takes real property and makes it personal. I'll give you a couple examples. An apple tree is part of the real estate, but once you pick that apple from the apple tree, you severed the apple, you took real property and you made it personal property. Once you remove the ceiling fans, once you separate it, severed it. Once you remove the kitchen cabinets, once you separate it, once you severed it, you took real property and made it personal. Severance, to separate. All right. But annexation is the opposite. Annexation means attachment. So when I went to Home Depot and I bought these beautiful chandeliers, as they were sitting in my car, they're personal property. While they're sitting in my car, personal property. While they're sitting on the floor, personal property. But the minute that I annexed them, the minute that I attached it to the ceiling, I took personal property and I made it real. Now it stays with the property. The kitchen cabinets that I bought at Home Depot are personal property. In my cart, in my car, on my floor. But the minute that I annex the kitchen cabinets to the wall, they stay with the property. And I took personal property and made it real. So annexation and severance are two new legal words, real estate words, I should say, that you're going to need to know. Annexation means to attach. Annexation means you took personal property and made it real. Severance, like an apple from the apple tree, means to separate and you took real property and made it personal. Okay? So now let's get a better understanding of this. Let's say you're walking through a home with a buyer, or you're trying to help a seller list their property for sale. Ask yourself, is this real property? Does it stay, or is it personal property that can go? Let's talk about it. The washer and dryer. The washer and dryer is not attached to the property. So the washer and dryer is personal. We can take the washer and dryer with us. We can leave it. Kitchen cabinets. Well, the kitchen cabinets are attached to the wall. They're supposed to stay. They're attached. They're annexed. The ceiling fan. Ceiling fan stays. It becomes part of the property. The lawn. Shrubs. The lawn stays, but the shrubs might not. And so you say to the seller, what about the shrubs? You taking them with you or you leaving them? The seller's going to laugh. What do you mean? You ain't taking them with me. But you now know it's not a joking matter. You now know that the shrubs could be considered personal and you could be ending up in court if you did not explain to the seller what they cannot and take and can take. But what about this refrigerator? Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't care when a refrigerator was $500. I've ended up with a lot of refrigerators because I did not understand the difference between real and personal when it comes to these refrigerators. But do you know what a refrigerator costs today, ladies and gentlemen? It'll be your whole commission check. These refrigerators going for $3,000, $5,000. You can order your groceries on them. You can watch TV on them and so forth. And you better make sure that you understand if that refrigerator is real or personal, or it can cost you a lot today. They're not $500 items anymore. So here's the ruling with refrigerator. I have a stainless steel sink, a stainless steel oven, a stainless steel microwave, a stainless steel dishwasher, and a yellow refrigerator. Well, that yellow refrigerator does not match the stainless steel contour of the kitchen. That yellow refrigerator is personal. You can take it with you, leave it, it's up to you. But if I had everything stainless steel and the refrigerator was also stainless steel, matching everything else, now it is real. And the seller might say, well, I'm taking the refrigerator with me. But in this situation, they would not legally be allowed to take the refrigerator with them unless they replace it with another stainless steel refrigerator. So why take it if you got to replace it anyway? So you need to understand and explain to the seller what they can and cannot take. What about the chandeliers? It's not a ceiling fan, it's a beautiful chandelier. You ask the seller, are you taking the chandeliers with you or are you leaving them? Seller goes, they were a wedding gift. I'm not leaving them. I'm taking them with me. Now you know that they'll have to replace the chandeliers with another light socket. They can't leave wires exposed. But the buyers, the potential buyers, will now know that these beautiful chandeliers are not included in the property. We already determined what's real, what's personal at the very beginning. This is why it's chapter 1. It's very important that we understand what's real, what's personal, what's staying with the property, what's not staying. Washer and dryer. The seller goes, I don't know. Should I leave the washer and dryer? Well, I could tell you right now, a first time buyer would love to buy a property that has washer, dryer, and refrigerator already included. It would make the house more sellable. If you don't need to take it with you, I would recommend that you leave it, especially for first time buyers. So, this will be your job as a real estate agent to not only educate people on what they can and cannot do, but how it could benefit them or harm them as well. Okay? So the washer and dryer, personal property, as you can see. The kitchen cabinets, they're attached, they're real. Ceiling fans, they're attached, real. Refrigerator, it's usually personal unless it's built in and it matches the rest of the contour, then it's real. Lawns and shrubs, well, part of the land, but be careful about the shrubs. I've been in court case, I just told you about it. I had another walkthrough, ladies and gentlemen, where all the kitchen cabinets were off the wall. And my client, the buyer, says, where's the kitchen cabinets? I said, I have no idea where the kitchen. I called the agent who was representing the seller. I said, where's the kitchen cabinets? He goes, well, they're in the kitchen like they're supposed to be with all other kitchen cabinets. I said, well, they're not in this kitchen. He said, what do you mean? I said, there's no kitchen cabinets on the wall. He goes, oh my God, let me call my client. Well, guess what his client said? Oh, they were a wedding gift. We took them with us. And this agent did not explain to their seller, real and personal, what they can and cannot take. So I said to the agent, your clients are either going to come back and replace these kitchen cabinets and put them back on the wall before we settle, or your clients are going to be giving my client a check for new kitchen cabinets. And guess what happened at the settlement table, ladies and gentlemen? The clients gave us a check, gave my client a check for brand new kitchen cabinets. I guess around 4,000, a little over $4,000. You know what they did? They took that $4,000 out of their agent's commission because their agent did not explain to them what was real and what was personal, what they could and could not do, what they could take and what they could not take. Had their agent explained to them that the kitchen cabinets are attached, they cannot remove the kitchen cabinets, this would not have cost or harmed anybody. So they gave my client a check for $4,000 for new kitchen cabinets, but they took it out of their agent's commission. Hmm? So you need to understand these things, ladies and gentlemen. So buyers often assume everything they see comes with the home, like the beautiful chandeliers. It's got to be understood what's staying and what's not. Um, it's not a guarantee just because they see it. Sellers may assume that they can take something with them, like the refrigerator, when maybe they can't. These misunderstandings can lead to contract disputes, closing delays, legal liability. So now you're starting to understand the importance of real and personal. This is why you, the real estate professional, must ask early on and clearly, what are you taking? What are you leaving behind? If a seller wants to take the chandeliers, the mirrored appliances must be written into the listing agreement. And so that potential buyers would know that the chandeliers and certain appliances are not staying with the property. All right, final note for this section, real property is transferred by deed, personal property transferred by a bill or sale of receipt. So fixtures in the law and what you, the new real estate agent, must understand. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I would suggest that we take a little break, take a half-hour break. Absorb some of the things that you have learned because it's already a little overwhelming your first day. But you are now on a legal track to become a licensed real estate professional. And this is an accredited class. So keep that in mind. So let's take a quick half-hour break. I will see everybody back here in 30 minutes. You can either pause it and come back, or you can continue. So enjoy your break. As we come back from our break, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So, fixtures and the law, what new agents must understand. So, understanding the difference between a fixture, which is real, and a trade fixture, which is personal property, isn't just about passing the exam. It's a matter of legal responsibility and contract accuracy. So, a fixture is an item that started out as a personal property. The chandeliers, you bought them at Home Depot. They're personal. But once they're annexed or attached to real estate, they become part of it by law, ladies and gentlemen. So, a fixture is any personal item that has been permanently attached to the land or the building in such a way that it's now considered part of the property. Common example of fixtures include built-in bookcases, the plumbing, the sinks, the light fixtures, the radiator, elevator equipment in high-rise buildings, wall-mounted oven and dishwashers. They're fixtures. They stay with the property. Once installed with the intention of staying, these items typically transfer with the property unless the agreement of sale says otherwise, like the chandeliers are not included. It's already been determined in the contract that the chandeliers are not included. Okay? So courts don't always rely on appearance alone. When disputes arise, the law uses three key terms to determine whether something is real or personal. You want to know what the law is, ladies and gentlemen? You want to know what the law is? The law is what the judge says it is that particular day. That's what the law is. You can have four different judges give you four different rulings on the exact same case. So the law is what the judge says it is that day, but it's what the book says. The three different key tests that a judge will use would be your method of attachment, your method of annexation. Uh, how is the item attached? Can it be removed without causing any property damage? Is it bolted in or is it just resting there? The adaptation of this fixture to the property. Was the item customized or built specifically for that space? For example, the refrigerator. These are usually personal items. But if the refrigerator is built into or matching the cabinetry, then it would be considered real stays. The seller can't take it with them, not without replacing it with another stainless steel refrigerator. But the agreement between the parties, just because the seller says they're leaving the washer, dryer, and refrigerator, if you don't add it to the agreement of sale, it's technically not included. Just because the seller says, I'm leaving the washer, dryer, and refrigerator, you're going to need to know as we go along that you needed to add it to the agreement of sale. Property also includes washer, dryer, and refrigerator. We'll talk more about that later, but this is the legality of a contract. What did the buyer and seller agree to in writing? All right. If it's in a contract, that's what controls the ruling. All right. So, important lessons for agents. Even when something seems obvious, courts have ruled both ways, or what is or isn't a fixture. That's why it's critical for the new agent to never assume and always ask. So take a note. When in doubt, write it out. Everything should be in writing, ladies and gentlemen. The safest way to avoid legal problems is to clearly identify in the listing or the sales agreement which items stay, which items go. In practice, why this affects you as an agent. This is going to get you in the courtroom if you're not careful. As a real estate agent, this issue will appear again and again, especially when listing a home or negotiating an offer. At the time of the listing, highlight listing, ladies and gentlemen. Listing is a real estate term. It means we represent the seller. We listed their property for sale. We are their listing agent. Come see my listing at 123 Main Street. So the word listing tells you we're representing the seller. Okay, so highlight the word listing. At the time of listing, the seller and the listing agent should walk through the home together and discuss which items will stay and which items could go. Anything that might be in question, light fixtures, chandeliers, built-in books, shelves, ceiling fans, custom drapes, even exotic landscaping and shrubbery, should be clearly stated in the listing agreement and sales contract as to what stays and what goes. All right. The number one way to prevent lawsuits is to write everything down, ladies and gentlemen. Everything has to be in writing. We'll talk more about that later. But for right now, you know that everything has to be in writing. We'll talk about it. Cannot have verbal arrangements. All right. Buyers may assume everything they see is included. Seller may assume that they can take more than they should. This gap in expectations can lead to angry buyers, failed transactions, and lawsuits after closing. The most commonly disputed items are drapes, light fixtures, appliances. As an agent, it's your duty to help the seller disclose and clarify their intention, help the buyer understand what is truly being offered, and make sure everything is clearly written into the agreement of sale, the sales contract. So, trade fixtures, the rules change in the commercial arena. So, we talked a lot about residential property, the refrigerators, the washer and dryer, but now commercial. So, as you prepare for your real estate license, here's something important to remember. You can sell residential and commercial real estate with the same license. You don't need a separate real estate license to do commercial and a separate real estate license to do residential. One real estate license allows you to do it all. You can do commercial, residential, industrial, agricultural. You don't need a separate license. One license does it all, but you do need separate knowledge. All right. You need to know the different levels of understanding when it comes to how the law treats property in each. So, trade fixtures is a piece of personal property that a tenant installs in that rented space to run their business. They need their barber chair, they need their dentist chair, they have to bolt it to the floor. It can't be wobbly. All right. These items may look permanent because we attached it to the floor, but legally they are not part of the building in the commercial arena. These are called trade fixtures, store shelves, bar counters, the lighting in the restaurant, the bowling lanes, the pin, the setting machines, the chicken coops, industrial and agricultural, pizza ovens, bolted to the floor. These in the commercial arena are known as trade fixtures. They're personal. These items belong to the tenant, not to the landlord or the property owner. The legal rules of trade fixtures, there are four key points that every new agent should remember. Trade fixtures are personal property. They don't automatically transfer with the building in a sale. The tenant must remove them on or before the end of the last lease. Remember, you don't have a legal right to go back into that property after your lease expires. So you have to remove your trade fixtures on or before the last day of that lease. If you don't, then those items could become the landlord's items. It's a legal term called a cession. This is not a legal class, it's a real estate class. So we're not going to get into that. But just make sure that your client understands that they have to remove their items before the lease expires. The tenant must repair any damage caused by the removal. So, you know that big swiveling barber pole outside going around in circles like a candy cane? Well, we had to bolt that to the ground. When we unbolt it from the ground, we have to fix the bolt holes in the concrete and put the property back to the way it was. It's very important we understand this and our clients understand that. So the tenant must repair any damage caused by the removal of these trade fixtures. Fixtures and trade fixtures are not the same. A fixture is real property. A trade fixture, even if attached, remains personal property. All right? So, good understanding of personal and real fixtures and trade fixtures, attachment and separation. Let's say a restaurant leases space in the shopping plaza. They bolt a commercial pizza oven onto the kitchen floor. If the oven can be unbolted from the floor and repaired, it's a trade fixture, and a tenant can remove it when the lease ends. But if the oven was installed in concrete and welded there, and removing it now would cause damage to the structure, the law may not treat it as a fixture It could stay with that building. And instead of being a trade fixture, the law might say now it's a fixture. But here's the problem. The tenant's next, the landlord's next tenant is a nail salon. What does a nail salon need a pizza oven for? So we need to understand that anytime that we're representing commercial leases, commercial tenants, we have to let them know that they can install these items, but they have to be able to remove these items later and put the property back the way it was. If not, we can have some legal problems. If you put this pizza oven in concrete and welded it, and now we can't remove it, we're going to have some legal issues afterwards. Okay? So, as a real estate agent, you must help your clients, especially commercial tenants and buyers, understand these things. What will be left behind, what can legally be taken, and what must clearly be spelled out in either the lease or the purchase agreement. Trade fixtures are one of the most misunderstood topics in commercial real estate, and getting it wrong can lead to legal battles, broken leases, or loss of property. Fixtures are real, trade fixtures are personal. All right? Now, we're going to go into the economic characteristics of real, and there's seven. Four of them are economic and three are physical. And let me tell you something here, ladies and gentlemen. The state exam is pretty good at tricking you here. The state exam's not hard, by the way. It's not hard, but it is tricky because life is tricky. So they're going to try to confuse you with the physical characteristic of property and the economic. There's four economics and there are three physical characteristics, seven altogether. We're going to have to know the difference between the physical and the economic. Okay? So understanding how land is defined not only by its physical features, but also by its economic value it creates and the social impact it has within the community. Characteristics of real estate has certain seven characteristics that make it unique from other forms of property. These characteristics directly influence how real estate is used, it's valued, and how it's transferred. They fall into two categories. Highlight economic. There's four economic characteristics which relate to the value. What makes it valuable? What gives it value? So the four economic characteristics deal with the value of the property, and the three physical characteristic, which describes the land itself. In this section, we're going to begin with the four economic characteristics that affect the value of a property. Scarcity, number one. Uh, while land may not seem rare on a global scale, it is limited in the availability, especially in specific locations or particular quality of land available. Only a portion of the Earth's surface is dry land, and within that, even less is available for development or ownership. The supply of land cannot be increased to meet demand. They're not making no more land. As a result, desirable land in urban centers, coastal areas, or commercial zones may be scarce, even if land elsewhere sits unused. This scarcity gives land its economic value, particularly in high demand areas. Now, let me give you an example, ladies and gentlemen, because land is not as scarce as you may think. If you take a Greyhound bus from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, you will have a good 2 hours at 75 miles an hour of unused or uninhabited land. It's not wetland, it's not wasteland, it just has not been developed yet. We're a beehive clustered society. We need others around us. Not everybody can live in the middle of nowhere without gas and electric and so forth. They're the company of other people. So, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, these are our beehive economics of society. And we have all these points in between. So there's plenty of land in Pennsylvania alone, ladies and gentlemen, more land than you will probably see or need or build upon in your lifetime. There's plenty of land. It's not as scarce as you might think, but because we're clustered, well, now we think that land is scarce. Okay? So this will give it its value. Improvements, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, an improvement is anything that we build on the land, the house, the garage, but also what about the offsite improvements like the gas lines, the electrical lines, the cable? Well, these improvements add the value to the property as well. So, improvements. An improvement refers to any man made addition to the land, such as the building, the roads, utility system. These improvements don't just affect the value of property on which they're built, they also influence the value of neighboring properties as well, or entire communities. For instance, constructing a shopping center may raise nearby property values, while installing a waste treatment facility could decrease items. Improvements are a key part of real estate development and a major factor in the investment strategy and land use. We'll talk about this later on, ladies and gentlemen, but let me give you an example. There's a rumor that they're going to be building a Disney theme park in your area. Are you anticipating the value of your property to go up or to go down now that they're going to be building a Disney theme park? Or now you hear there's rumors that they're going to be building a toxic waste dump in your area. Now, are you anticipating the value of your property to go up or go down? So, this is an economic characteristic, a future event that could have an effect on the value of your property. All right. Um, and what you build on the property. Permanence of investment. Now, this is where the offsites, the cable, the gas lines, the plumbing, even if the property burns down to the ground, these things are still underneath the ground and part of the property. So they're more permanent investment and long-term investment. So real estate improvements often require large financial commitment in material, labor, and infrastructure. Once installed, components like water lines, sewage system, roadways are not so easily removed or replaced. Because of this, real estate tends to be a long-term investment. The return on investments may not be immediate, but over time, well located and well maintained property improvements typically offer stable and lasting value to the property. Ladies and gentlemen, the last one here. This is where psychology is going to come into play. There's going to be a lot of psychological triggers. You're going to have to apply psychology a lot. And location, 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 which we say area preference in the real estate arena. Your average person will say location, location, location. But we in the real estate arena, we'll say area preference. And people are willing to pay 10, 20, 30, $40,000 more for identical property only because it's located on this side rather than on this side. People assume or feel that property on this side has lesser value than property on this side, even though they're both identical houses, identical area. It's just that people presume or make these assumptions. It's okay for us. We'll make some more money for selling the same property for more money because of their perception. So, this is your first psychological triggers that you'll deal with in the real estate arena. Let's talk about it. Location is often considered the most influential economic factor. Highlight that. That means on the state exam, when we talk about the four economic characteristic, this is the one that's going to be on your state exam. Area preference or location. This is going to have the most effect on the value. Okay. Location is often considered the most influential economic factor in determining a property's value. Also known in the Latin name situs. Highlight situs. Situs means to place. And what could be built there, what is, so you got an empty lot, and on the sign you see situs, and then you see a mall, illustration of a mall. Situs means what's going to be placed there. All right, it's an old Latin word to place, situs. Area preference is not just about physical geography, it's about the emotional and practical appeal of specific location. People consider things like school districts, commute times, community reputation, the neighborhood feel when choosing where to live or invest in property. This subjective preference is what causes one side of the street or the other side of a river, perhaps, maybe, to sell for significantly more than others, even when the homes are nearly identical. So here's an example. A river divides a town into two sides. Homes on the north side of the river sell for an average of about $170,000, while identical homes, exact same duplicate, on the south side sell for more than 200,000. There's no physical difference between the two sides, only the public perception that the south side is a better neighborhood. That preference alone drives up the value. And so this is going to be your first psychological trigger, the first time you'll deal with psychology in the real estate arena. All right. So these are your four economic characteristics: scarcity, making more land; improvements, what you build on the land; permanence of investment, which will stay there even if the property's no longer there; and the area, location, 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 or for us, it's known as area preference. Write that down, area preference. As you can see, location, we don't say location, we'll use the real estate term area preference. Okay? So now let's deal with the three physical characteristics. And these are going to be in almost every chapter that we work with, ladies and gentlemen, these three physical characteristics of property. And they don't actually have anything to do with the value, like the economic, but they have everything to do with real estate. So we're going to talk about these characteristics again and again and again. So in addition to the economic quality that influence land value, real estate also has three key physical characteristics that make it different from any other type of property. These natural features are inherited to the land itself and help explain why each parcel is treated as unique in both law and in the marketplace. The three physical characteristics of real estate are immobility, indestructibility, and uniqueness. Immobility, ladies and gentlemen, it's not like you can pick up the land and take it with you and place it somewhere else, can you? The land is immobile. It stays right where it is. So land is immobile, stays put. Land is indestructible. If the property burns down to the ground, is the ground still there after the fire? Property's gone, but the ground's still there, isn't it? You need to understand that land is indestructible. This is going to play a big role. Insurance companies know that you don't know this. We'll talk about it later. But the property could burn down to the ground, but the ground still there. Land is indestructible. There's rare cases of sinkholes and so forth, but for the most part, land's indestructible. So you can't pick it up and take it with you. It's immobile. Property could burn down to the ground, but the ground's still there. It's indestructible. And it's unique. From this point forward, you got two empty lots next to each other, ladies and gentlemen. They both got trash, dirt, weeds. They look identical, don't they? But they're not. Not for us, the real estate professionals. Each has its own unique topography, its own value. Even though to the average person, these two empty lots look identical, not to us. Not to us, the real estate professional. We need to understand that each lot, each property is unique. These are the three physical characteristics that are going to play a big role in your real estate arena, ladies and gentlemen: immobility, indestructibility, and uniqueness. Highlight it. Let's talk about each of them. The first and the most obvious physical feature of land is that it can't be removed. You can't pick it up and take it with you. While structures can be demolished or relocated, the surface of the land can be reshaped. The geographic location of the land is fixed, it's permanent. A parcel of land cannot be picked up and transported to a different place. Its value is closely tied to where it sits on the map. This immobility is one of the reasons why location plays such a critical role in real estate. Indestructibility. Land itself is considered permanent and indestructible, while improvements on the land, like the house, the garage, they could be destroyed. They could be teared down. They could be lost in a fire. They could become obsolete. They no longer have any value. The physical permanence supports the idea that real estate is a long-term investment, particularly when paired with durable infrastructure and ongoing maintenance. So it's important to note, however, that the value of land can still decline even if the land itself cannot be destroyed. This might happen due to environmental damage, zoning changes, shift in how location is perceived. So here's what this means, ladies and gentlemen. You have a house on this land. It's a beautiful mansion. Now this land has a lot of value because it's a beautiful mansion. But then all of a sudden, we hear about these rumors that people have been murdered in this mansion. The mansion is haunted. Now, the value of this land with this haunted mansion is different, isn't it? So, the improvements could affect the value of the land. All right. And uniqueness, ladies and gentlemen, non homogeneity. You see that? Highlight uniqueness and highlight non homogeneity. Bonus points if you can remember this because you might, I don't think you will, but you might see it on the exam. And when you see the word non homogeneity, you're supposed to know that it means uniqueness. It's an old English word, it's actually Greek, but we won't go into that. But anyway, non homogeneity, uniqueness. And it means that no two parcels of land are exactly alike. Even if two properties are the same size, same shape, their location, their soil composition, the topography, the surrounding make each parcel unique. So they all got dirt, trash, weeds in it. They look the same, but they are not. This characteristic is known as non homogeneity or simply uniqueness. No two lots are identical, no two properties are identical. Even though they all appear to be the same, they are not. Each has its own topography, each has its own uniqueness. You need to understand this in the real estate arena, ladies and gentlemen. Because land is a one of a kind, there is no true substitute to any individual parcel. This concept supports the legal principle that real estate must be identified precisely in contracts, surveys, and deeds. There is no copy of a property, only that one specific place on earth exists. So land is unique. Each lot has its own topography. Each has its own uniqueness. It's very important you understand it. We're coming towards the end of our chapter now, ladies and gentlemen. So you're gaining an understanding of the different types of law that influence real estate, and we're going to talk more about it right now because even though you're not going to be an attorney, you need to understand law, ladies and gentlemen. There is federal law, state law, and local law. But we don't call local law law, we call it ordinances. And it's because federal has the right to make law, state has the right to make law, but local government does not have the right to make law. So we sometimes substitute the word law with ordinances instead when it comes to local law. But these are the three laws that you're going to have to understand: federal law, state law, local law in the real estate arena. So let's talk about it. Laws affecting real estate. Because real estate is both permanent and unique, it is governed by a wide range of legal rules that differ from many other industries. Even the most routine real estate transaction is shaped by laws that can be complex and overlapping. As future real estate professionals, real estate licensees must develop a working knowledge of the legal system that impacts how property is bought, sold, owned, and transferred. There are several sources of laws that influence the real estate here in the United States. These include the U.S. Constitution, that's federal, acts of Congress, federal and state agency regulation, state constitution, state statutes, and then we have our local ordinances and common law. Notice that we use the word ordinance because federal can make law, state can make law. You ever see Fragile Rock, ladies and gentlemen, an old cartoon? I'm just a bill today, but someday I like to be a law. But for just today, I'm still just a bill. And so this is how it works. The House of Representatives will put together a bill, or a bill is presented to the House of Representatives. They'll vote on it. Then it will go to the Senate. If the Senate votes on it and passes it, then it goes to the president or the governor to be signed or vetoed. So the governor has the same power as the president in the state. And so we have our state representatives, our state senators, and the governor. And then in federal, we have the House of Representatives, we have state senators, and then the president. And so they have the power to make law. But local, like Philadelphia, making sugar tax law and cigarette tax law, well, these are not constitutionally legal. We're not going to get into that in this class, ladies and gentlemen, but understand who has the power to make law. And what happens is the law will be handed down to the local governments to enact, to enable. So federal has the right to make law, state has the right to make law, but local government does not have the right to make law. So we'll change it with ordinance, okay? As you'll see there, known as common law. Which includes legal customs and court rulings. Each layer plays a role in shaping how real estate can be used and how rights are protected. So, the sources of law in real estate in the United States, laws that impact real estate originate from 7 different sources. There's 3: federal, state, and local, but 7 of the sources. The U.S. Constitution, again, that's federal. Federal regulations by Congress, that's federal. Regulations passed by the federal agencies is federal. But then we go into state law, state regulation, state constitution, state statutes, and then we go into local. Zoning laws, for instance, local laws, local ordinance, common law. So we got federal, state, local. Okay? Each of these layers influence how property is owned, transferred, and used, making real estate one of the most legally layered industries in the nation. Legal topics every real estate professional should know. As you move forward in your training, you'll begin exploring the legal foundation every licensee must understand. These include the law of contract. Highlight the law of contract. I'm going to test you on this in a second. Highlight that. The law of contract, property law, the law of agency. Highlight that. The law of agency. Highlight that. And your state real estate licensing law. Ladies and gentlemen, you're taking a 75-hour class right now. You're in this class because it is a state requirement. In order for you to get your state real estate license, you have to take this 75-hour class. This is a state requirement in order to be licensed. Okay? So, state real estate licensing law, which also covers federal law, environmental regulations, as well as federal, state, and local tax laws, shape real estate practice. And we're going to talk about land use controls, zoning law. Highlight zoning law, ladies and gentlemen. There is no way that you're going to be working with real estate without understanding zoning law. It's in every single contract. So highlight zoning law. And zoning law is local. We'll talk about it. And development restrictions at the local level significantly affect property use and value. These topics will be discussed in greater details throughout our course, but even now it's important to recognize that real estate licensees carry a responsibility to act within the legal framework. So I said I was going to test you. Remember the first one I had you highlight the law of contract? Let me ask you a question. You're a real estate agent. Can you help me out here? I'm working with this agent, my real estate agent, and we did a home inspection, and my real estate agent is telling me that I have to pay for the new roof. The roof's leaking. I'm buying this house, the seller's selling it, but my agent says that I gotta pay for the new roof. Is that true? Do I have to do that? Can you help me out here? What do you think? Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. The minute that they told you that they were working with another real estate agent was the moment you should have understood contract law. I find out you're speaking to my client. What gives you the right to be talking to my client? Don't you understand contract law? You just interfered with the deal. It cost us thousands of dollars because you were being too kind, too helpful, too friendly. Not in this business, ladies and gentlemen. In this business, we got to be careful about being too kind, too friendly, too helpful. And yes, we're a new agent, and yes, we want to help. But one of the first things that you better understand is contract law. And if they're with a different brokerage, they're under contract, the minute they mentioned that they were working with a different agent, you could not assist them in any way. And you can't pretend that you didn't know. You'll have a duty to know. We'll talk about that later. Oh, Your Honor, they never told me they were working with a real estate agent. That ain't going to work. You had a duty to know. All right, so we'll talk about it. So you'll need to understand before you help anybody out, are they currently under contract with another brokerage, another firm? And if they are, you cannot be of any assistance. until they're no longer under contract. You understand contract law now? One of the first things that I like to teach you. So be careful about trying to help somebody. You got to find out, how'd you get here? You just told me you got a roof. How did you get into this point? Are you buying it from the seller directly? How did you get to a roof issue in this contract? How did that happen? You had a duty to know. So we'll talk more about that. But what about the law of agency? What is agency, ladies and gentlemen? And here's one thing that I do know. Over the years, I cannot get the brain to understand and remember agency. It doesn't compute. You'll forget about it. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the word agency, write it down, hyphen, employment. Substitute the word agency with the word employment, like the unemployment agency. Get it? But agency means employment. Agency means the things that we can and cannot offer. So the law of agency is the law of is the law of employment. The law of agency is the law of employment. And the law of agency explains what we may offer the client under our license and what we can't offer the client under our license. So the law of agency is the law of employment. And the first form that we give everybody is called a consumer notice. We'll talk about that later. That explains agency. Agency means employment. So highlight that. And the law of agency is the law of employment. Okay? We'll come back to that later. But zoning laws, ladies and gentlemen, is local. The zoning laws in Philadelphia is not the same as the zoning laws in Bristol. The zoning laws in Harrisburg is not the same as the zoning laws in Luzerne County. The zoning laws in Pittsburgh are not the same as the zoning laws in Grove City. So zoning is local. It's not federal. It's not state. It's local. And zoning tells you what you can and cannot do with a property. Can you buy a property and turn it into a rooming house if it's zoned single family residential? No. All you can do is use the property as a residential single family property. So you need to understand, as a real estate agent, don't be letting somebody buy a property with the assumption that they can do this. Oh, I'm going to buy this single family property that has 6 bedrooms and turn it into a rooming house. No, you're not. Unless you get the zoning changed as a multifamily property or a rooming house, no. It's a single family property. You want to change it into a multifamily property, you're going to have to change the zoning. You're going to need a variance. We'll talk about that later. So zoning is local law, and zoning is what you can and cannot do with the property. If it's a single family property, you can't make it a duplex. You can't make it a triplex unless we get it rezoned as a multifamily property. You can't have a restaurant out of the house, barbershop out of the house, not legally, unless it has commercial mixed use zoning. So zoning is local law, and zoning tells you what we can and cannot do with the property. And that's it. Nothing outside that zoning until you get the zoning changed. We'll talk about that later. Okay? So throughout your training, you'll be introduced to specific areas of the law that directly relate to the responsibility of real estate licensees. While real estate agents are not expected to be legal experts, they are expected to recognize when a situation may require legal intervention. A key part of your professional judgment while knowing when to refer a client to a qualified attorney. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me. Real estate licensees are not permitted to draft legal documents that define or transfer ownership rights, nor are they allowed to offer legal advice unless they are also licensed attorneys acting in that role. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're not a doctor unless you're licensed to be a doctor. You can't get medical advice. You're not an attorney unless you're licensed as an attorney. You can't get legal advice. You're not a real estate agent unless you're licensed as a real estate agent to give real estate advice, ladies and gentlemen. And as you can see, you have to have a license in order to practice real estate in this state. You need a license to practice medical. You need a license to practice law. You need a license to practice real estate. Otherwise, you are practicing medical without a license. You're practicing real estate without a license. You're practicing law without a license. These are criminal offenses. So you cannot act as an attorney unless you are a licensed attorney. So don't cross this line in the sand. You're a real estate agent. You have to understand where your limits end and legal representation begins. Let me ask you this question, ladies and gentlemen. Your client asked you, should I get an attorney? How do you answer this question? Better start getting used to these questions and have your templated answers ready, ladies and gentlemen. Should I get an attorney? How do you answer this question? Do you say, oh, you don't need an attorney, you got me, you're a real estate agent? Or do you say, yeah, you should get an attorney? How do you answer the question? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to circle back to that later. It's too soon. But again, it's going to come up. We're going to need to know how to answer it, but not today. Rome wasn't built in a day. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back to it again very soon. All right? So, understanding the boundaries of your authority as a real estate professional is just as important as knowing the rules of property. A wise licensee knows when to advise and when to step back and refer. Air rights, ladies and gentlemen, this is big. You might not understand this, but it is a big part of real estate. In Pennsylvania, the air above a property isn't just empty space. It can hold real value, especially near airports and so forth. To ensure safe takeoffs and landings, government agencies and airport authorities often acquire aviation easement. Highlight the word easement, ladies and gentlemen. Easement. And write this down. An easement is the right for somebody else to use your property. An easement is the right for somebody else to use your property. For instance, in your deed, you have an easement at large or a utility easement. This means gas, electric, water, they can come onto your property without knocking on the door. They could jump over the fence. They read the meters without knocking on the door. They're not trespassing. It's in the deed. This easement gives them the right to be there. They're not trespassing. Xfinity or Comcast puts a ladder against your property, and you're like, get off my property. You're trespassing. No, they're a utility, ladies and gentlemen. And as such, in your deed is this easement at large, this easement in gross, or this utility easement that allows them to be on your property without knocking on your door. So this is known as an easement. In this situation, we're close to the airport, and you have to let the buyer know that your air rights could be gone through an aviation easement that the federal government has taken to prevent any interference with landing and takeoffs of the plane. So you might be giving up your air rights because of your close proximity to the airport. This would be known as an aviation easement. They now own the air rights above your property. So the easement is the right for somebody else to use your property. We'll circle back to it, but highlight it now. So an aviation easement, which are legal rights to control the airspace around runways. These easements help prevent buildings, trees, and other obstacles from interfering with flight paths. In some cases, these rights are purchased outright, especially in areas close to airports where safety and noise concerns are critical. Now, which is not very familiar with you if you're in Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh, but if you're in the Poconos, if you're upstate Pennsylvania, then you're familiar with mining and mine substance. You're familiar with the rumbling of the underground activity. And because of this vibration, maybe underground explosions or drilling and vibration of major machinery, that vibration could cause impact to the frame and the structure of the property. And if you cannot assure a potential buyer that this mining activity that is close proximity to your property, that the vibration, if you cannot assure that to the buyer that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the foundation of the property because of the mining activity, then we're going to need what's known as a coal mining notice and a mine subsidence insurance policy. And this is going to be on your state exam, but it's really for upstate Pennsylvania, not so much Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Pittsburgh, unless they're putting in subway lines underground. Then maybe we would need some mine subsidence insurance. Other than that, This is for upstate Pennsylvania. So even though it might be foreign to a lot of you, it's going to be on the state exam. So let's talk about it. Pennsylvania has a long history of mining activity, particularly coal mining. While this industry has brought great economic value, it has caused a hidden hazard called mine subsidence. And this is the downward shifts of land because of this mining. Mine subsidence occurs when underground mine shafts collapse or shift, causing the land above it to sink or form troghs, sinkholes. This damage to homes and buildings could be subtle or severe, from cracked walls to misalignment doors to complete structural failures. Under Pennsylvania law, ladies and gentlemen, sellers are required to provide a coal mining notice. Highlight that. So the seller under law must give the buyer this coal mining notice, explaining that there's been some kind of activity that could have hampered the structure or the frame of this property. And by law, the seller must give this to the buyer, and this is called a coal mining notice. It's coal mining notice to the buyer if a property might be affected. If a seller cannot guarantee, cannot assure that the structure is protected against subsidence, they must inform the buyer of this in writing. This legal requirement helps buyers make informed decisions and protects them from unexpected damage. So here's what you're going to need to know. Homeowners insurance, ladies and gentlemen, does not include mine subsidence, and it doesn't include flood insurance. Flood insurance is something that we're much more familiar with. But here's what you need to know. It's important, very important. Homeowners insurance does not include the mine subsidence insurance, and it does not include flood insurance. We'll see why this comes into play later. Your qualified buyer may no longer be qualified if they need a separate insurance policy like flood insurance or mine subsidence because they're not included in the homeowner's insurance policy. It's very important that you understand this. So, take note that standard homeowners insurance does not include coverage from mine subsidence. However, special insurance policy called mine subsidence insurance is available to provide this protection and should be considered in the high risk areas. So again, the coal mining notice required by law from the seller to the buyer tells the buyer if they're going to need this special insurance. All right, finishing up, ladies and gentlemen, real estate licensing law. All right, the law that gets you a real estate license. Real estate agents don't just sell houses, they represent others in transactions involving property, money, and legal rights. For this reason, every United States state and Canadian province requires licensing to ensure agents are competent and act in the public's best interest. Now, you're going to get a test in a little bit, ladies and gentlemen, and you're going to get this one wrong. So I'm going to be real fair. I want to make sure that you understand it. Each state has their own legal requirements. 75 hours in Pennsylvania, 90 hours in New Jersey, 120 hours in New York, okay? All right, these are examples. Each state has their own licensing requirement. It is the state that requires you to have a real estate license. So if you're licensed in Pennsylvania, you can't sell property in Jersey because you're licensed in Pennsylvania. So we would have to get a Jersey license and a Pennsylvania license. You want to sell property in Florida, well, you're going to need a Florida real estate license and a Pennsylvania real estate license. We'll talk about reciprocity later. But for the most part, understand that you are taking a state license, and the state of Pennsylvania requires 75-hour requirement. Each state has their own licensing requirement. Fair enough. I don't want you to get the answer wrong. Each state requires a certain amount of hours in order to get your real estate license. Okay? Pennsylvania is 75 hours. Okay, so let's talk about it. So, the core purpose of the real estate license law is to protect consumers from fraud, negligence, and unethical behavior. Highlight that, ladies and gentlemen. The purpose of your licensing law is to protect the public from fraud, incompetence, and dishonesty. That's it. So the reason that you're licensed is to make sure that you are not representing yourself, but you're representing your clients, protecting their interests. If you want to be a real estate investor, by all means, be a real estate investor. But as a real estate investor, you are protecting yourself. You're trying to get the best deal for you. But as a real estate representative, as a real estate licensee, you're representing others, and your job is to get the best interest for them. So you got to separate this. And we want to make sure that you're not taking advantage of the public with this knowledge that you are now gathering. And so the purpose of the licensing law is to do that. It's to protect the public from fraud, dishonesty, and incompetence. And this is part of the licensing requirement and understanding. Okay? So, real estate professionals are governed by the Real Estate License and Registration Act, RELA, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it's not a word. I just kind of make it a word. RELRA. These are initials. You're going to need this on your licensing, on your initial page, ladies and gentlemen, because it's absolutely going to be on the state exam. You are under the Real Estate License and Registration Act. You're getting a real estate license to sell real estate in Pennsylvania to make money. More money than you ever made in your life. This much I assure you. Wait till you see the money you're about to make with this real estate license. But the license is governed by Harrisburg under the organization called the Real Estate License and Registration Act. Act means law, an act of Congress. So every time you see that word act at the end, you can substitute it with the word law. So this is the Real Estate License and Registration Law. Act is an act of Congress. Remember, federal and state have the right to make law, the power to make law. All right, so an act is an act of Congress law. So this is your real estate license and registration law. Notice the initials, and the rules are set by the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission. The Real Estate Commission is our private police department, which we'll talk about later, ladies and gentlemen. So we have the lawmakers, and then we have the enforcers. So the Real Estate License and Registration is the lawmaker, and the Real Estate Commission is the enforcement agency, like the private police department. Okay? Before a person can legally represent others in real estate transaction for money, for compensation, they must meet specific educational requirements, pass a state license exam, receive their real estate license. And remain in good standing, licensees also must complete continuing education. We call this CE. Here's what you need to know. It doesn't matter if you're an accountant, an insurance agent, a doctor, a cosmetologist, a real estate agent. If you have a license by the state, you will be required to do a continuing education every year or every 2 years or so to renew your license. One, it keeps you updated on knowledge and information. And two, it is continued revenue for the state with your continuing educational requirements. So your license as a real estate agent is good for 2 years. And then after 2 years, you'll have to do a 14-hour CE class or continuing education to renew your license. And it's very important because each time we have a new president, the new president sets new rules and laws, the HUD sets news, and you need to stay abreast of these things. And so by having this continuing educational requirement helps us stay abreast of new changes by each administration. So it's very important that we do it. And this is a 75-hour class, but when we do our CE, it's a 14-hour class. Okay? We have to follow ethical and professional standard of conduct. Standard of conduct is your behavior. You might be doing things legally, but ethically, your behavior has a lot to be desired. So your ethics or your standard of conduct is your behavior. Just because you're doing things legally, your behavior might have a lot to be desired. Get it? All right? To renew their license. Now, the final thought, ladies and gentlemen, because we're done this chapter, congratulations. Whether you're dealing with the air above the property, the ground below the property, license that allows you to represent others, real estate is more than just the property, which is known as the improvement. It's law, it's responsibility, and it's knowledge. You're just beginning your journey. This is just chapter one, just kind of lays a foundation. The rest will build from here, one lesson at a time. This is why I decided, ladies and gentlemen, to break this into a chapter. Rather than a student paying $598 for a class that they're not sure that they're going to like or not like, you're investing $28 in the first chapter and then $28, $30 in the next chapter. And each chapter, it'll come to about $598 when it's all done and said. You're not going to be paying more for it because you're paying by the chapter. So it'll come out to about the same amount. But in any event, you're not investing the whole 598 in one shot. You're doing it chapter by chapter, $28, $28. And so if you want to quit, you didn't have to quit on $598. Sorry, you quit on $60 or $90. But I told you, ladies and gentlemen, your first three chapters, these will be the first three chapters of where you might consider quitting. After that, if you make it past that, you'll be so glad that you didn't quit. The first three chapters are probably going to be the most difficult for you. Stick it out. Don't quit. Remember, $12,000 was my agent's first commission check. Had he quit, that would have never happened. That agent makes over $100,000 a year, ladies and gentlemen. Where do you see the money you're about to make? We'll get into it. But I made it easy that you can make these small little increment investments, one chapter at a time, as we go along. Now, here's what I want you to understand. In order to pass this chapter, to get to chapter 2, we have a quiz. There's 20-question quiz. You're going to take your time on these quiz. The answers are usually in the question. We'll talk more about that later. But you need to get a 75 or better in order. So there's 20 questions, and you're going to need at least to get 15 of these 20 questions correct in order to go to the next chapter. So take your time on the quiz, but at the very beginning of the chapter, we had those key terms. And as part of your homework assignment, ladies and gentlemen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to two things. At the end of our chapters, starting tomorrow, or starting when you take chapter 2, at the end we have what's called our final thoughts or our overview. This is what we call the Cliff Notes. And I want you to start reading your key point reviews or your final chapter reviews out loud. Because your voice, your mouth is going to be your business. We're going to have to read to our clients. We're going to have to read these contracts out loud to our client. And I don't want the very first time that you start reading out loud to be in front of your client. So what I want you to do is take part of this, the last part of these chapters, read these out loud to yourself, get used to projecting your voice, get used to the authority that your voice can project and maintain, and get used to reading out loud. When you read something out loud, it goes to your long-term memory. When you read silently, it goes to your short-term memory. When we get into chapter 2, I'm going to show you how the brain works, how we remember things. I don't go into it in detail because this is kind of make or break chapter 1. Some of you might have found it grueling and say, I'm quitting here. It's a shame if you do. You'll never make the money that you could make. And some of you will say, you know what? It's tough, but I'm going to go to chapter 2. I'm going to go to chapter 3. When you get in the next chapter, where do you see what I got for you? I'm going to teach you things that either outside the real estate agent on how the brain works and how you will be able to remember things and pass the exam very, very easily. So, ladies and gentlemen, this counts as part of your 75 hours. You, after completing the 20-question quiz and answering the 20-question quiz, you have now completed chapter 1 of these 24 chapters, and you now have accredited time towards your 75-hour state requirement in order to get your real estate license. So congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. This is a licensed class. I'm licensed by the state of Pennsylvania. If you are here now, then you've obviously understood through my free class how to check the Bureau of Professional Occupational Affairs website to verify that this is a bona fide school licensed by the state of Pennsylvania. So congratulations on completing chapter 1. I hope to see you in chapter 2 and beyond. Where do you see what's ahead, ladies and gentlemen? I got pleasant surprises for you as we go along. 20-question quiz, get 15 of them right, and we can move on to chapter 2. Hope to see you in the next chapter.